Welcome to DEIJ Hot Takes. My name is Daryl Sinclair, and this is the podcast where we discover the bold and transformative ideas shaping diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work today. In this episode, we are joined by Angeline Aow, who is an international advisor to the Council of International Schools, a prominent DEIJ consultant, and many of you will know her from the amazing book, Becoming a Totally Inclusive School. Angeline, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Daryl.
No. I would like to add just quickly, as we were talking about before, I had the privilege of meeting Angeline last year at the ECIS conference, and I really want to point this out because it's really important to me, and I really want to share this with people, that the conversation I had with Angeline through her kindness and spending, I think, an hour or so over lunch having a conversation really opened up some of my understanding about DEIJ work and really inspired me to try and reach out and connect with people more. So just want to, again, identify you for that and say thank you and hope that other people are inspired to reach out. So with all that being said, could you please share with us the DEIJ hot take that is currently helping to guide your work?
Thanks, Daryl. My hot take is a bit of an uncomfortable truth, and it is this: there can be a point where an individual's actions, driven by a need to belong, when the actions are mixed with anger and righteousness, can end up othering and creating non-belonging for people who have been dehumanized in that process.
Hey, thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. So the ideas of belonging, othering, the elements of anger, and how we're going about it. Could you please take us through briefly, what does that mean in the context of DEIJ work for our listeners? Why do you feel this is a uncomfortable truth or a hot take? And how do you express this in the work that you do?
I've been learning a lot more about belonging without othering from the work of from the work of Stephen Menenden and John A. Powell from the Berkeley Othering and Belonging Institute. And in the most recent book that they've published, they wrote that the problem of non-belonging may be most acutely felt by marginalized and othered groups, but it is experienced by superordinate and big status groups as well. And we are all a part of a system. And when any group on either end in our very polarized world these days wants to belong so much that their need to do that results in actions that others people, then we're going to remain polarized and not be able to bridge and work towards inclusion, which is what we want.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, when we're looking at this broad identity formation, this sense of belonging, many people, when the emotions which are driving that may not be positive emotions or inclusive emotions, so anger you mentioned, so we're identifying ourselves by identifying what we're not, which can potentially marginalize and push aside other people, and that's incredibly harmful. So with the work that you've done and the experiences you've had, can you give any examples of how we might focus on that identity formation and that sense of belonging without othering, without having to say what we don't want, what we are not?
I think our constructs of identity are, socially created constructs. And so we will always have understanding of ourselves in relationship with others.
Mm-hmm.
And because we can identify as, I'm, for example, I'm a Chinese Australian living in Berlin. I am bisexual, but living a very heteronormative life with my husband. I can identify as a multilingual learner, a migrant. And for me, I might interpret that in one way, and when other people see me, they may see the same identity markers, but their interpretation of it will also vary depending on how they're socialized, their experiences, their background, and so each one of our identities are our own concepts of self, but also our interpretations people have of us. And when those two things align, then we see feel a deep sense of belonging, because people see us for who we are and they understand us well. But when that doesn't align, then it can, or when people don't see our value and worth and recognize our identities as value added things to any space, then we get angry, we feel injustice, and anger isn't a good or bad feeling. It's something that I think we should have. I think Audre Lorde, in a very famous
Yes.
kind of lecture titled "The Uses of Anger:
Yes.
Women Responding to Racism," it effectively addresses this sort of racial injustice and says that we need to first acknowledge the anger from personal experience, or perhaps we're angry because we're witnessing injustice. Then we need to harness the anger and use it as a tool. But if we are sitting in anger, and then anger also then becomes hate and judgment, then when we sit in a space of judgment, means that we probably are also likely to not see another person as someone who can learn and grow.
Yeah.
And then when we are sitting in that, I would ask people to question, has it served you? And most likely it's just caused moral distress,
Yes.
because it hasn't served. And it's when we sort of throw anger and judgment in another human being's face because we have maybe hate, or we feeling righteousness. And I'm not saying don't feel those things, because you know what, a lot of people with marginalized identities, they have a right to feel this, because these things are not right, and that's not, we want to shift that. But when this is the only thing that's driving a person, though, and then they're perpetually seeking to be understood instead of perhaps seeking to understand,
Yes.
and this truth then kind of sucks up all the energy in every room,
Yep.
and gives everyone else kind of zero opportunity to live or even breathe as their own true selves. And that's a really hard way to live. And I go back to Audre Lorde, and they wrote that anger expressed and translated into action in the service of our shared vision, and our future, can be really liberating.
Yes.
And the strengthening act of kind of clarifying what we see as our best common goal that we should have together. But it's a painful process to translate that, because first we need to identify who we are, and then who our allies are, with whom we may, and also who we may have grave differences with. And so I think for me, this to belong without othering, we need to learn from what people tell us, and they might tell us things that make us uncomfortable because we don't have that understanding. It's a gap for us. And we need to learn from how people also reveal themselves to us, because sometimes through that process of them sharing their perspectives, we may feel also dehumanized in that situation. However, I think we need to be hard on systems, and we need to believe in people's ability to grow and see the humanity in everyone, no matter how, and this is the hard part, Daryl, no matter how the harm that someone may have caused us. But if we don't see the humanity in that person and we're angry, I don't think that serves us. because that hatred it comes when we have judged, and that's what causes polarization. And in the end, who profits from this anger? It's not even us. And so, yeah, so I've been learning a lot from the Othering and Belonging Institute, which I highly recommend for everyone. And so this has helped me with my work because it's refocused in a deeper way the work I do with intercultural competencies and thinking about how we can bridge across commonalities and differences.
Oh, no, thank you for that, Rich, and the resources that you've mentioned, which I will do my best to link in the description. Just to briefly share my part of my takeaway from what you shared, it really resonated with me in the idea of identities, even within all cultures and identities. It's something which is quite prevalent within communities labeled as Black or Afro-Caribbean communities. I would refer to them as, at least within the European and UK context. But even within that community, which is often seen as monolithic in various ways, there are identity politics within it. And who you want to be, you may prevent someone else from being that person. Or you may say, this is how I understand it to be a Black man in this space. There's another Black man who's representing himself differently. Therefore, that's wrong to me, because that conflicts with how I am representing an identity I see analogous with his. And this can lead to a lot of defensiveness, a lot of harm, a lot of hatred, a lot of anger. But like you said, these are all valid emotions which need to be processed and engaged with. What I like to do at the end of each episode, you've mentioned some wonderful key points, but if you could sum it up for us just as a key takeaway for our listeners, maybe something for a reflective question for them to consider, or a particular resource that you would point them towards. The uses of anger is definitely going to be something I link. But what would you give as a key takeaway for our listeners today?
The key takeaway I hope that your listeners will have is that we need to not stop fighting multiple truths between people and seek to understand, and not only seek to be understood.
I love that. Seek to understand, not only to be understood. That might have to be the quote for this episode. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful discussion and all your sharing, and a lot of your sharing of self, which I really appreciate you doing. And I respect your ability to be confident to do that. For our listeners, I will place links in the description where you can connect with Angeline and explore her ideas, her work, and all the fantastic things she shared today. And thank you for watching or listening. And I will see you all in our next episode of DEIJ Hot Takes. Thank you, Angeline.
You're welcome. And I look forward to following your series, Daryl.
Thank you.